as well as Ms. Andrews, the board representative. I expect that she'll join virtually as well. She does have a conflict this morning. So with that, we'll go around and we'll do introductions, starting with you, Mr. Parks.
Lori Benino.
Heather Frederick.
Thank you.
And we also have Mr. Rossi online as a committee member, and Nancy Samuels, who works in the budget department.
Leanne Evans, Treasury Department.
Joseph Sanchez, Chief Operating Officer.
So first, we're going to start if there's anybody here for public comment. There is not. And now we'll move on to the minutes.
Approval of the minutes. Hopefully, everybody has had the opportunity to review the minutes, read through them. Any discussion? No discussion? All those make a motion to, anybody make a motion to approve?
So
So
moved.
moved.
Second.
Okay. All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Motion passed.
The next agenda item is the presentation. And so we had the conclusion of the legislative session on May 5th. And, at our last meeting, I really wasn't able to give much of an update. And so we did have several bills that were approved at the end of the legislative session, as well as the conclusion of what FEFP is going to look like. And because I wasn't even able to truly give an estimate, which is the first time I can say in this position, I wasn't able to give an estimate of where we stood financially. I was pleasantly surprised in that, it could have potentially been a reduction of up to $50 million to having, a positive, over $60 million increase in revenue. So we did end up where the state legislators have funded public education at the same time as expanding the voucher program. And so we just need to make sure that as the voucher program continues to expand, that they continue to fund education at the same level, because the enrollment and the number of eligible students is only going to increase exponentially, which we'll see on one of the charts. So we have to make sure that they continue, the state continues to fund education at the same level. So starting with the financial related legislative update, I really am only focusing on those that have a financial impact. There was a much deeper review at the last board budget workshop, and there's going to be a more detailed, in-depth review of all the legislation that was passed sometime in June. So starting with Senate Bill 1550, there were a lot of changes to prescription drugs and self-insured plans and just insurance plans in general, and what restrictions you're allowed to put on those plans. So we are self-insured at the district. We do have restrictions on where employees can go to fulfill their subscriptions. Like, for example, between Walgreens and CVS, employees can only go to CVS. By making that change, we were able to save nearly $5 million in prescription savings. This bill would restrict changes like that. We are working with our actuary now that it might not be as bad as what we originally thought. So the potential impact is up to $2.3 million, but in speaking, like I said, with our actuary as well as our lobbyists, it's possible that it could be much less than that. So we're still working through what the impact of that bill is. But it was one that kind of was unexpected, just came out of the woodwork, wasn't one that we were following. So just, it goes to show you have to read every single bill that's out there because it could have a potential negative impact. House Bill 837 was tort reform, so this one is actually positive. It does limit what cases can be filed. Prior to this bill being passed, there were thousands of cases that were filed to try to get in before the change in the law. So that one is positive, but it is going to be challenged, so we don't know if all pieces of that are going to remain intact. Senate Bill 7024 is FRS. So if you remember at our last meeting, we had a House and Senate version that was anywhere between 0.8% or 0.7%, $8 million impact, up to 5.7%, which was putting in all the cost of living increases that were taken away during Governor Scott's time in office, to having resulting in almost a $60 million impact. Where we ended up was kind of a hybrid between the House and Senate version. So they did not approve the cost of living increases, going back and putting in a 3% cost of living increase for all of the pension benefits going back to 2011, but they did add in and approve all the changes to drop. So changing drop from 90, for instructional personnel, from 96 to 120 months, administrative personnel from 60 to 96 months, and also changing the drop interest rate going forward from 1.3% to 4%. So that's on a go-forward basis. And so we do expect that we're going to have, this was something that we were supportive of, because it gives, we have a significant number of vacancies, teacher vacancies especially, and so when you're in drop and the teachers were at the end of their drop term, they had to exit and leave. So this gives, it's still, the extension of drop still has to be approved by their supervisor, but it does give the option if somebody does want to stay that they can. And it's expanding it now not only to instructional personnel, but administrative personnel, so all employees of the district. House Bill 733, we talked about this. This was middle school and high school start times. So this would be starting July 1st of 2026, so that would be school year 27. Middle schools cannot begin earlier than 8 a.m., and high schools not earlier than 8:30 a.m. That is going to have logistical challenges that we're working through, so it's good that we have some time, that we have a runway to try to figure out what the impact would be.
Do we have a position on that? Are we going to try to change it? Are we going to, the 26 gives a couple of legislative sessions to.
And what part of what is in the bill too is that providing additional funds for schools that want to pilot it earlier to work out what those challenges are. And so there's the option of two small, medium, and large districts participating in pilot programs to see what the impact would be. And I guess that would also go into whether there would be any legislative changes.
Is that something we're applying for?
The pilot program, as of right now, I don't believe we are. And we don't know how it's going to work either. We don't know if DOE
It
is.
seems like it's such a huge change, and it affects so many, I know it affects buses, but it affects.
It affects a lot of different things.
After-school
families,
activities,
working.
working, those students that work after
Sports.
school, athletics.
But I don't want to speak for our board members, but I think that some board members are sensitive to the issue of, high school kids getting up early as they are and middle school, being where it is. So I don't think there's universal opposition to it. I just think that we need to look at it, study it, see what the implications are of it and how we can best implement it, because it is the law right now. And we need to get feedback from parents and from schools and see how this all impacts us. But I suspect that we're probably going to put together some kind of internal work group to look at how we can accommodate the law, because we got to follow the law. So, but you're right. We have a couple of years to see if there may be some changes that takes place between now and the full implementation, and we'll provide our feedback to the state to see if there's some things that we would like to see in order to provide some modifications if necessary.
Thank you.
And we don't know how the pilot program is going to work and whether the Florida Department of Ed is going to just select which schools would be districts would be part of the program, or whether we're going to have the option to apply. So we're still waiting for more information on that. House Bill 401, sovereign immunity, that one failed, didn't go anywhere, it died. That was where both the House and Senate were proposing increases to our sovereign immunity limit. So this was something positive that came out, very positive that came out of the legislative session.
So it's decreases to sovereign immunity, but increases to the limit.
No, there's no change to sovereign immunity. So it's staying exactly as what it is right now. So that the proposals to increase were denied. There is some legislation related to IT. So there's a Student Online Personal Information Protection Act. That is not supposed to have any impact to districts. It's just to vendors that are contracting with school districts, that they're not allowed to use any student information for any purposes. We do, but then we have to make sure that we incorporate that in our contracts and make sure that they are complying with that. House Bill 379, technology in public schools, going through and limiting access by students and prohibiting access to certain programs as well, and then also prohibitive applications. House Bill 379 and Senate Bill 258 do work somewhat together. So it's blocking access, limiting access, the last meeting that we had, we were wondering, well, how are we going to know which list of applications are going to be prohibited? Is that something that each district is going to be responsible for monitoring? But the Department of Management Services is going to provide a list. And then we have the ability internally with different applications that we have to go through and block access to whatever DOE does put on the list. So we can easily block access to TikTok, anything that we need to within our network. We have that capability to do that and comply with both of these, the legislation. The next is related to vouchers and legislation related to vouchers and charter schools. HB 1 had already been passed and signed into law at our last meeting, so that created a universal voucher program. There is no limit on the number of students that can apply and that are eligible for the voucher program. That's just for the regular students. For those special needs students, there is a cap on the number of special needs students, but that cap was increased from 1% to 3% of the total population. And the reason, I believe, for still keeping the cap on the special needs group is that they're eligible for that full funding of whatever they would be eligible for. So it would be up to $50,000 per student, depending on what level of need they are and what matrix level they are. House Bill 1537 that one is mostly, it's all academic related, but there was one piece in there where now with charter schools, if they had 1F, they would not be eligible to receive PICO or capital funds, but that has been expanded to they need 2 consecutive Fs, 3 consecutive grades of C, 2 consecutive unsatisfactory ratings before those capital outlay funds would be stopped from the state. We have House Bill 443. This is just adding in statute that we need to review the grant applications timely, that districts have to review the grant applications timely. DOE is going to have a standard monitoring tool when we are reviewing and evaluating charter schools. And the last item there is allowing charter schools to transfer unrestricted funds, so that would be cash or assets, to another charter school outside of our district. And it's saying that it's an unforgivable loan of no more than 5 years, but if it's an unforgivable loan of 5 years, then it's really never coming back to us. That really expanding the flexibility for charter schools, especially those management systems that have schools in multiple districts across the state. And then House Bill 1259, that's the charter school capital outlay. That was passed as well. The impact is over $469 million over 10 years. So Ms. Evans has been working hard to balance the budget while taking that $469 million out of the capital plan over the 10 years. So charter schools are now going to receive a proportional share of the capital funds. It's only those charter schools students that are physically present, so it wouldn't be for any virtual charter schools. We don't have any virtual charter schools. We did in the past, we don't right now, but virtual charter schools would not be eligible. And then they did add a phase-in provision, so it's not going to be 100% starting in 2024, it's going to be 20%. 20% of what the allocation is, and then in 25 it would be 40, and then it will go up to 60, 80, and 100. So it will take us 5 years to get up to the full annual impact of what's going to be passed through to charter schools. And the charter schools will have to attest in writing, that's the last part of the sentence, that all property will revert upon renewal or non-renewal or termination. But
So that means the property comes back to
the property comes back to us, but most of our charter schools don't actually own the building, they're leasing the building, and a lot of them are leasing it from their management companies. So I don't know really what this is truly going to do. You know, it's probably it would impact more of the smaller charter schools than it would those that are that have the charter school systems that they're operating throughout the state. And so now getting into the changes in FEFP that were approved. So they did go with the House version, which was collapsing some of the categoricals into the base student allocation. So you can see all the ones that are red circles there, the sparsity supplement, which we don't receive, but the reading program, instructional materials, teacher classroom supply assistance, and the teacher salary increase were all rolled into the base student allocation. So that makes it look like the base student allocation is a lot higher of an increase when you're comparing to the prior year than it actually is. And what's also interesting is they collapse these categoricals into the base student allocation, but we still have to comply with all of them. So you'll see that as I walk through. So it was kind of meaningless in a sense. When you look at the district cost differential, that was changed to something called the comparable wage factor. We had a slight increase in our amount. I don't know what our increase in DCD would have been year over year, but comparing to our prior year DCD to the current year comparable wage factor, which is the new factor, we went up just slightly, which I'll be able to show you in the comparison. Yep.
So the collapse and transfers, did that work out to what it would have been, or?
I'll show you more. I have a breakout that shows the comparison where I then take our current allocation and I collapse the categoricals in so that we can see the true comparison of what is the true impact in the base student allocation. Because for some districts, it actually results in a loss. They went down, ours went up slightly, but not the 15% that they're saying that it did. ESE, which is the green, the guarantee allocation, there was a change to that allocation, which was actually positive to us. So it was either going to be our per student amount from the prior year or no less than an average amount, and that ended up resulting in an increase for us. The supplemental academic instruction, that changed to educational enrichment allocation, and they kind of expanded what it could be used for. So all they did was truly just change the name. And the turnaround supplemental services rolled into that educational enrichment allocation. And there's a state-funded discretionary supplement that helps offset the discretionary millage that's going to the voucher program. So here I'm going to walk through each of the categoricals that was rolled into the base student allocation. So the classroom teacher allocation was allocated, was rolled into the base student allocation, but there's also a separate line on FEFP that says this is how much was given related to the teacher salary categorical, and you need to still use it to comply and increase your salary to 47,500, or to give increases to other full-time instructional personnel. So of that increase, when we're looking at the increase in the base student allocation, 15 million of that is set aside for classroom teacher categorical, because I'm still calling them categoricals, because that is what they are. The teacher classroom supply assistance, that was also rolled into the base student allocation, but then within the implementation bill, it says we still have to allocate a minimum of $300 per teacher, and they also expanded the teachers that are eligible, because before you had to be full-time teachers, now part-time teachers are also eligible. So they expanded the number of teachers eligible. So we have to set aside $3.7 million, including our current year carryover. The comprehensive system of reading instruction, so that's the reading categorical, that got rolled into the base student allocation. But in the implementation bills, it says we still have to submit a board-approved reading plan by August 1st. And as part of that plan, we have to lay out exactly what each of the programs are and how much each of those programs cost. And so we had to set aside $12.7 million as part of our reading plan that was actually approved at our last board meeting. Instructional materials were rolled into the base student allocation, but we have to certify in the implementation bill on or before July 1st how much of the base student allocation is going to be set aside for instructional materials. So you can see that, it really didn't change anything.
No categorical, but it's categorical.
It's not a categorical, but it's still a category. It's in base student allocation, and now it even makes it harder to track it because, they're still requiring us to track it even though it's in base student allocation. So I'm still keeping all the same program numbers that we had for tracking purposes. Other changes to the FEFP, there's the state-funded discretionary contribution. So our amount that's being allocated is $36.9 million, and that's because the vouchers should just be using state funds. And so this is the way to help offset the amount of local funds that are being allocated to the voucher students. We have the educational enrichment allocation, which was called SAI. They rolled in turnaround schools, the turnaround program within the educational enrichment. We don't have any currently in Palm Beach. And they also were trying to expand, like I was saying, what this money could be used for. It was pretty flexible before, but it's pretty much any educational enrichment activity, anything that could help and provide supplemental supports to the students. The ESC guarantee allocation, so it had to be, it's either the per student amount we had last year, so ours in FY23 was $1,748 per student, eligible student. With the implementation bill, the change was you would either have your per student amount from the prior year or no less than $1,951 per student. So we ended up going up, and you'll see when I do the comparison, we had an $11 million increase in our ESC guarantee allocation because of this change. And then the comparable wage factor, so our comparable wage factor compared to our DCD last year was 1.0438. Our comparable wage factor is 1.0442, so it went up just slightly. And the change with the DCD to the comparable wage factor, we had some districts that were below 1. Because of where they were in the state, their cost of living was much less, so there were some that were at 0.99 or 0.98. Now no district will be below 1. So if they have a comparable wage factor that's 0.98, they're going to be brought up to 1.0. So that's everything, all the changes within the FEFP program. So now within the implementation bill, the General Appropriations Act, this is what they have, funding we're going to be receiving that's outside of the FEFP program. So charter school capital outlay, charter schools are going to be receiving part of our millage, and then they're also going to continue to receive PICO funds as well. So the state is maintaining the $213 million they allocated in FY23. They allocated the same amount in '24. School recognition funds. If you remember, school recognition funds went away for a couple years when when it was approved, when the teacher salary categorical was approved, part of how they paid it was through school recognition, rolling those funds into the teacher salary categorical. This past year, the state reissued school recognition outside of FEFP, and that's what they're doing again this year. So they're maintaining $200 million, which was the same amount that we had in 2023. The allocation that we received was $16.5 million, including charter schools. So that is based on school grade and some other factors, and then the monies can be used for bonuses for everybody within the school. So it's decided and directed by the teachers. Everybody has to vote on how the funds would be distributed. And then there's the Educational Enrollment Stabilization Program. Because if you recall in the last meeting, I was very concerned about what the growth of the voucher program is going to be. And I really felt like the state was underestimating the number of voucher students. And so what they've done is they set aside a non-recurring one-time reserve of $350 million to address any increase in the voucher students over and above what the state projected. So when I was going through the whole estimate and projection, I was thinking about setting aside an amount, and in speaking with our lobbyist, setting aside an amount as a reserve. They said, I don't really think that's necessary because the state did set aside $350 million. So when you look at the comparison, I'm not, even though I think the amount of voucher students allocated to Palm Beach County is low, I do believe the reserve will make up for that difference when we're looking at it statewide. So the highlights, the general fund is balanced. And I can even, say the capital projects budget is balanced as well. Ms. Evans has been working hard on that. But in order to balance the capital budget, we really couldn't do much new. We couldn't do any large new projects. The only projects you're going to see are those that we could fit within the budget. And so within the general fund, we have the increase in the BSA. After adjusting for all of those categoricals that are rolled into the base student allocation, it's a 3.54% increase. If we take out the teacher salary categorical, if we take that out altogether, the increase is $120 per student, or 2.45%. If we were to look at, just looking at the BSA, it would be an increase of 12%. The increase in total per student funding is $432, or 4.94%. We were able to set aside, the impact for FRS for our district is $18 million. I was thinking it was going to be, potentially $57 million. I had set aside what the governor had recommended, which was $25 million, or a 2.5% increase. It ended up being a little less than that. So set aside $33 million for FRS and health premiums, because we know that health premiums are increasing. We're able to set aside $31 million for salary increases, and that includes the teacher salary categorical, which is a little less than half of that amount. And then because of the significant increase in revenue, which is resulting from the increase in the voucher students, we have to set aside $6 million in our board contingency to continue to comply with board policy.
So with that, there won't be an increase in health premiums to staff?
No, that includes splitting the increase with employees. And so we are still working through coalition bargaining with the employees. But what I had presented at our last meeting was that it's a $30 million projected increase in premiums, and splitting that between employees and the district. So $15 million and $15 million.
Thank you.
I do have to say we haven't had an increase in premiums for over 10 years. That is extremely unusual.
lucky.
And we've been very fortunate. Our claims, we've been able to keep claims down by making plan design changes that really didn't have much of an impact to employees, like the change in the prescription drugs. because, just restricting employees from going, instead of going to Walgreens or CVS, just going to CVS, that was nearly a $5 million savings to the plan. So they could still go to Publix and other places, but just that one change created a significant amount in savings. So we've been working through, over the past 10 years. We also have been very proactive on our healthy rewards, our wellness initiatives. So we provide employees a $600 discount on their premiums if they participate in that healthy rewards program. And we do believe that that helps to keep our claims down because we're catching illnesses early on rather than at the end where it's going to be a lot more expensive to address.
And it keeps a healthier workforce.
Correct. When looking at the FEFP, so this is a little bit different format than what I've done in the past because I have our fourth calculation, which is our funding right now as of April 14th. And then I have what's called a fourth calculation modified. So I take the fourth calculation that we have now, and I collapsed all of those categoricals that were collapsed into base student allocation into the base student allocation. And then I have the conference report that was approved. Then I have the difference between the conference report and the regular fourth calc. And then the last column is the difference between the conference calculation and the modified fourth calculation. So looking at the first row there, row 1, you can see the projected increase in our students is 9,579. When we get to the next slide, you're going to see that the bulk of that is actually in voucher enrollment. In district-operated schools, we're about 1,000, and in charter schools, we're about 750. So the bulk of the increase is in the voucher program. When you look at the increase in the base student allocation, if we take the conference report compared to the fourth calc, not making any modifications or adjustments, it's an increase of $578 or 12%. But if you look at the modified fourth, yes?
I don't see a difference between the first two.
Yeah, so if you look in, you have to look down in look at row 5. Between the base student allocation, 4,788 is in the first column, and the next column is 5,183.
Oh, that's not a total.
No, because I couldn't average, I didn't go back and back into that part of the number, but I took the categoricals in rows 16, 14, 12, and 9, and rolled them up into 6.
Okay, got it.
And then took row 6 divided by the number of students to come up with the 5,183.
Okay, got it.
And then then looking at the conference report to the fourth calculation modified, it's an increase of $183 or 3.54%. And the little bubble on the side there, if we were to back out the teacher salary categorical from the base student allocation, it would be an increase of $120 or 2.45%. In looking at so what's highlighted there in green, row 8 is the educational enrichment. So that was just, rolling in the turnaround program. We didn't have any turnaround schools in Palm Beach County. We had some previously and then had some carryover funds, but we don't have any turnaround schools now. And in looking at the increase in, the ESE guarantee. So you see the ESE guarantee is row 7. So you can see we had an increase of almost $12 million in the ESE guarantee as a result of bringing us up to that minimum average amount per student. The categoricals that were left unchanged was safe schools. So with safe schools, we have a $2.7 million increase, and the mental health allocation was left as a separate categorical, and the increase in that is $1.3 million. So next year will be much easier to do the comparison because it will at least be the, apples to apples. In looking at, there were some changes to the class size reduction. You can see there was a reduction of $9.4 million in the class size. That's row 22. Because the class size, most districts are now doing class size at the school-wide average. And so the state has been changing within the FEFP formula what the factors are for class size each year. And they've been, reducing them down. And so the impact this year is $9.4 million. The state-funded discretionary supplement, that was one of the new categoricals that was added, that was to help offset the amount of local funds going to voucher students. So for our district, that was $36.9 million. And in looking at the change in enrollment, that's moving down to rows 31 to 35. You can see the total increase in enrollment is 9,579. 8,366 of that is estimated to be in vouchers. Charter schools are 500, district-operated schools are 713. So the amount that's going to be passed through, your question?
So, yeah, so if there are additional students, so that means they're already in the private schools? Or,
Yes.
So you think that people who are in private schools will apply for this money and so that makes them new students? to the
Right,
district?
that's why we're still going to continue to have growth, we believe. We've had moderate growth since since COVID. So we do expect we're going to continue to have moderate growth, but the growth within the vouchers is really not necessarily coming from our schools. It's coming from those that were already in private schools that are now eligible to receive public education
Public
funding.
funds. And so those students get the benefit of, and parents get the benefit of the state funding and don't have to follow any state rules regarding class size or teacher certification or testing.
There are some minor requirements they're supposed to follow but I can't speak to what those are, but it's very limited. And they do have to, there are some private schools that are not participating. There is a list of all private schools on the Florida Department of Education website. And it lists, they don't even have to, they can participate in one of the voucher programs and not the other. So they can participate in the one that's just for regular students, not the special needs students. And it tells you, each of the private schools, whether they participate and which program they do participate in, and why there was I don't know if you recall in our last meeting, there was a significant difference between the Senate's proposal and the House proposal on the enrollment, and specifically the enrollment with voucher students, because there was a survey that was sent out to all the private schools that are currently not participating, asking if they would participate in the voucher program, and 30% of them responded and said yes. And so that's why the Senate had a much larger increase in voucher students than the House proposal. This increase of 16,400 almost is about 1,000 less than what the Senate had in their proposal. So that's why I think that the estimate is still light. And most likely they're going to, the more parents find out that this is an option, they will push their private school to participate. And if the restrictions, depending on how onerous those restrictions are, which they seem to be somewhat limited, there wouldn't be much reason for them to not participate. So that's why it's going to just continue to increase exponentially, especially since there's not a limit on the number of students that are actually eligible.
But the private school can limit what students they accept.
They can, and there are many of the private schools that don't have space, that are looking, there have been articles recently in the newspaper, you've probably seen them as well, of certain charter schools looking to expand, and to add seats too. And so that might also change the dynamic. And part of the discussion that we had at the board workshop was part of our strategic plan is marketing and getting out to the community what programs we do offer at our school sites. We know we have to compete. A lot of the principals don't realize that the programs they offer far and exceed that's offered at a private school. And so we have to work on getting that message out there. And that was one of the priorities of the board, is working on and continuing to market the school districts so we don't start to lose students to private schools.
And to let the public know how successful the schools are so that they continue to support the referendum.
Correct. And, we were just talking about the other day how some of the private schools take out, a full-page ad to talk about all the students and all the schools that they went to. Our students are going to all the same schools, and a whole lot more of our students are going to those schools than the number of students that they have. But a lot of people don't realize that. And so just being able to be able to get that message out there to give the community the true knowledge of what we are doing, the good work we are doing here at the school district. So you can see that, we started with, an increase of 9,600, but really only 700 of that is in district-operated schools. But even so, after looking at the total impact, it's an increase of $93 million, which I know seems like a lot of money, but I always tell you every year it goes fast, and it does. So starting with $93 million, we first have to set aside $18 million for FRS, to comply with FRS. We also have to set aside the increase in the teacher compensation. So 14.9 million or 15 million is our share because charter schools also receive a portion of that amount. Setting aside $15 million for health premiums. We're starting to bring in and address that ESSER funding cliff. So we moved, summer school had been moved into ESSER. So we moved summer school back into the general fund. And then we had just an increase in custodial supplies. So that increase in custodial supplies, I now moved that back into the general fund this year as well. We didn't increase the allocations to the schools. We're going to continue to purchase those centrally like we have been. And that's standard stuff like soap, paper towels, toilet paper, that type of stuff. Increase in the contingency reserve to maintain the 3% is $6 million. We had a meeting with FPL. They're projecting that our increase in our rate is going to be $3 million, which I thought was interesting because there was also an article recently that said their rates went down or were going to go down, but they're telling us our rates are going to go up. So I don't think they would have had the meeting with us a week before that article went out if it wasn't actually true. But they whenever they're increasing our rates, they do meet one-on-one with us to let us know, and so that we can be prepared. We do have an increase of 700 students, so we do have to we added additional staff to align with that projected increase. So that's $5.8 million. So that's not only teaching staff, it's teaching and support staff, includes our ESE, exceptional services teachers as well, and additional support staff for that. We also had, we have 2 new schools that are opening up this year. So we have a high school, Garcia High, that's going to be opening in West Boynton. So we have all the additional overhead costs related to those schools because they're brand new. So it's all the support staff, all the custodial staff. It's been interesting. It's been 18 years since we've opened a new high school, everything that goes into opening a new high school. We have the changes in the departments that I went over with the committee at our last meeting. That's $2.6 million. And then the salary settlements that we had this last year, they were for most of our unions, everybody, the unions other than CTA are effective January 1st. So now the $4.7 million represents a full year's impact in FY24. So after taking into account all of those adjustments, that leaves us a surplus of 16 million. So when we add the 16 million to the 14.9 million or 15 million, that leaves us $31 million for a salary reserve.
Has the district not been impacted by the increases in property insurance?
We did, that was included in this past year, and that is funded from the capital projects fund.
Okay.
And so that increase, we went from about 11.9 million to nearly $16 million. I know I personally received mine and was in shock that it nearly doubled. Because I was thinking, okay, I'll get the same rate increase as the district, but I guess I don't have the same credit quality that, that we have. And looking at, and I was noticing for others, some others had more than doubled. There was something on the news last night going up 77%. It's crazy what the increase is. This is a historical look at our enrollment, and I did show this last time, but I think it's useful to the committee to see again with the actual numbers that are projected for next year. So the blue bar is our district enrollment, the orange is charter schools, and the gray is FES. And prior to the expansion of the whole voucher program was in 2020. The reason why you see it earlier on there, but it's a much smaller bar, it was just McKay previously. And then starting in 2020, McKay was still separate, but now McKay and the voucher program, they're all in one. So I just included them all in one just for comparison purposes. So you can see in 2020, the first year of the voucher program, we went up about 2,000 students, and you can see how it's increasing exponentially. It took charter schools 20 years to get over 20,000 students, and we're going to see voucher students over 20,000 within 5 years. Or I guess by the 6th year, we'll see them easily over 20,000 students. So it's just, it's going to, vouchers are going to far surpass charter schools, and it's going to take some time for it to level out because private schools are going to continue to participate. So to be able to know, it's very difficult right now to project, what the actual growth is going to be because it's not that they're new students coming in. These are students that are already there that are eligible. And it's when are they going to ask for it? When are they going to realize that they're eligible? And a lot of the private schools wouldn't be surprised if all of a sudden they then increase their tuition because now $8,700 of it is being paid by the state. So now if they were paying $8,000, their tuition was $8,000 before, why not bump it up to 10 or 12? Because a parent was paying $8,000, they can pay some more. So it will be interesting to see what's going to happen in the private sector.
To track the demographics also, and especially with the limits on students with disabilities
And who they accept. I mean, it was
they
interesting.
accept, yeah.
It was interesting to see, which schools. It's interesting to go out there and look and see which of the private schools participate in which of the scholarship programs. I can say I was a little bit surprised. The certified school property values are not going to be certified until July 1st, but we are looking at another double-digit increase in '24, but then it's expected to still increase, but going back to more normal levels in '25 and in future years. And so with the capital budget, I told you Ms. Evans has been working hard, and the 10-year capital plan, even taking out that $469 million or $68 million is balanced. Our capital plan we do a 10-year capital plan. We're only required by the state to do a 5-year capital plan. When we went for the sales tax, since it was expected to be at least 10 years, we then shifted to a 10-year plan. And so we've gone over and above what statute requires. And that's really helped us to be proactive in understanding what changes need to be done within our district and building in truly what the needs are. Because not only do you have the schools, but it's the deferred maintenance of maintaining the schools. You can't just build it and not continue to maintain them.
So in balancing it, though, you had to stop some projects, right? So
So we can work through
it
the.
doesn't meet the needs, or,
I mean, there were some contingencies that had been set aside, and then there were changes within the plan of projects that had to be moved up. And then I can let Ms. Evans go through what her process was.
There were a few projects that we initially thought we would add into the capital plan that were new, that we decided not to. And those were the Phase 2 of the historic Roosevelt and Carver, the renovation of the warehouses, we call them Australian and McKesson, but 2 warehouses. Westlake Elementary and River Beach High School were both being considered and very well may be needed, but we're not putting them in yet. We want to make sure that we can calculate and verify that those schools are needed and put them in the plan when they're needed. So those have been taken out of the capital plan for the moment. Not at all. I expect those schools will be added in at some point. And the other projects will be added in. We really wanted to get a good handle on the impact of the charter schools and how that's going to play out. We've got those numbers in based on looking at the current capital outlay for charter schools and what that looks like. Some of those numbers may change, and DOE is doing the calculations on those, I believe, in October. So we'll have a better idea on what that looks like once we've seen it once. So projects may be added back in next year. But the way we were able to balance it, truthfully, there were a lot of requests for roofs and windows and doors and air conditioning projects that we've said we can't do them in the year we plan to do them. We need to shift them out a little bit. So there was a lot of shifting of projects to moving them out. And then we've added some things in as well. We're looking at the artificial turf for high schools being phased in. We wanted to get them done in the first 2 or 3 years. Now it's over a 10-year window. Things are being spread out a lot longer. Lighting in the fields, digital marquees, roof replacements I mentioned have been spread out. The intercom replacements are being done over a 5-year window. We have the old wired systems, and there are now new technologies that makes it a lot easier, so that instead of schools would have the option to bring one classroom or the whole school. Now they can do it by grade level or by building. So it gives them a lot more flexibility, and that partners with our security enhancements. So we're trying to roll those in quickly. Waterproofing and painting, the exterior buildings are all included. The interior we've delayed. We wanted to get that done faster. It's being spread out more. Electrical upgrades, security projects, we are funding all of those as quickly as the vendors can do them. So it really looked at every item to figure out the priority and what needed to be done and what could be done. A lot of the balancing, the harder years are years 6 through 10, because remember, the state is ramping up that allocation of charters. So those out years are where we still had lots of reserves because we hadn't identified exactly which roofs and windows and doors need to be replaced in those last few years. So it's a lot easier for me to balance that right now. We are going to find significant issues in years 6 through 10 as those years roll into the current plan and we identify specific work that needs to be done and the money's not going to be there. So I expect we will face some significant challenges in the future, but we're able to balance it for now without too much pain. I think the construction department would argue that there was a significant amount of pain in delaying projects. Once they did that, it was pretty easy for me to balance it, but we are tapping
once they
into-
took the pain.
They took the pain. Well, our schools will be taking the pain. I mean, when we
And
talk
our
about
students,
balancing
yeah.
it, on paper, it's the construction department, maintenance department, and me working together on that. But at the end of the day, if we can't replace a roof as quickly as it's needed, that directly impacts students and kids, and the kids and the teachers.
I mean, I think the point I want to make real clear is that we didn't, from the 2023 10-year plan, we didn't take projects out. We
Right.
just didn't add as many projects in. That's,
Okay.
so just to be clear about that. So we
Yes.
didn't start ripping projects out of the plan. We just couldn't add as many as we wanted to. And some of the projects that we had in the plan, we had to stretch out a little bit further to make it balance out year by year. So that's some clarification.
Right. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
There was about, in balancing the first 5 years, there's about 36 million that we're short, but we had reserves in the capital plan set aside to deal for things like hurricanes. You know, we may get FEMA reimbursement, but it may take 7 or 8 years. We have to pay for it up front. So we are tapping into those reserves to balance it. But we had adequate reserves to make that happen. So we are able to continue and fund all the existing projects. It's additional projects that became a problem. And I'm personally worried about the maintenance, deferred maintenance, major projects that need to be in those last 5 years. That is going to be a challenge.
Yeah, so in looking at our sales tax, which is expected to sunset early, we're now going to have to really take a hard look about looking to renew that. Because we are taking out such a significant amount from what we thought we were going to have available for additional projects in the future, that's now no longer going to be there. And our capital plan, construction projects, you've seen this before. These are the exact same projects that were in our capital plan. So the only changes are the ones that are on this list. And Ms. Evans went through some. Would you like to go have them go through these in more detail? But we talked about the artificial turf, adding the lighting at the baseball and softball fields, the marquees, digital marquees for the elementary schools, making that consistent so that we can provide that notification to parents, as they're making it very clear from school to school and consistent from school to school. Adding some additional roof replacements. Evans talked about the intercom. Painting is very important. I mean, I'm approving purchase orders almost on a daily basis relating to painting schools.
A lot of painting going on.
A significant number of painting projects and security projects. A lot of security projects going on as well. And we do get additional grant money from the state for security projects. Although it is limited, it's less than $2 million now. And there's a lot of effort to go through to get reimbursement, but we're spending well above what the state is giving us for security. And then we're also very fortunate that we have the referendum that was approved by the community, and a portion of that is related to security. So we're able to use that referendum as well. So if there is a shortfall in capital, we do have the referendum that we can use for security projects so that we can make sure that funding is not an issue for getting those security projects completed. It's more just the limitation on enough vendors and supply of the actual goods.
In addition to the referendum, a large portion of the sales tax was set aside for security projects as well. So we were using sales tax, state grant, we tapped the operating referendum for projects as well. So that certainly is the priority of the district.
And then as part of the requirement of receiving our ESSER funds, I always have to give an update and say, we are still spending our ESSER dollars. We're spending our ESSER funds on the same manner as what we started with the first year. So we're now through ESSER 3. That sunsets June 30th of 2024. We have 370 positions within that ESSER grant that are at the school sites. About 300 of those positions have been consistently filled. Once the grant sunsets, those positions will be going back into the vacant teacher positions that we have. Our vacancies with our teachers have been higher than pre-COVID, and so we have more than enough positions for those teachers to go into. So we have no concerns, and that is why we limited the number of positions put in ESSER, because we knew we were going to have to reabsorb them back into the general fund. So I am happy to report, because at our last meeting, I didn't know whether I was going to be able to say the general fund was balanced or that the capital projects fund was balanced, but they both the general fund and capital projects funds are balanced. The general fund is balanced, and last year I wasn't even able to set anything aside for salary reserve other than what was allocated by the state. So this year, we are able to set some additional aside. That does mean, though, that we would be splitting the increase in benefits with the employees, the increase in the premiums. The district could absorb the full amount, although that would mean we wouldn't have anything left over for raises. So that's, we do have one pot of money at the end of the day to work with, so it's how that money is spent. In looking at the future and beyond, what are those legislative increases going to be in FRS? Because they're just mandated. They tell us what they're going to be. We don't have a choice. And what other unfunded mandates are there that we're not aware of? And then with our health claims, are we going to be able to get the health claims back under control where they had been in the past, where our increases were well below the national trends? So, how can we increase participation in the Healthy Rewards program to expand, a healthier workforce? And so working on different initiatives like that, but monitoring what our health claims are, and hopefully we won't have to continue to have increases and we can have another 10-year run of no increases in health premiums. Continue to monitor the ESSER funding cliff. I'm trying to wean everybody off. So when they come to me and say, oh, just use ESSER to pay for this, I'm like, no, we're not using ESSER anymore. We're not sending an amendment to the state. This money is going away and we need to learn to live within our means. So, continuing to monitor and just, like I said, wean people off that ESSER is there and available to spend. And I mentioned also sales tax. It's expected to sunset early in December of 2025. We really need to look at that, with everything that's happened with the charter schools and them taking such a significant portion of our capital funds. So our next budget workshop is on June 7th. We potentially will have another budget advisory committee on June 2nd. I do have it on the calendar, but it is going to be up to the committee because the next thing on the agenda is the draft report to the board. Because as a committee, one of the requirements within policy is that there is a presentation to the board, which would take place either at the board workshop on June 7th or tentative adoption on August 2nd. So I did provide the committee a draft, which is purely just a draft for you to get started on. I want to get your input. I want you to make changes to it. And then whichever committee member volunteers to present, I can work with that person on the changes to the report. And so I have the Budget Advisory Committee date of June 2nd. I have the room reserved if the committee thinks that we need to meet again to go over the report. We have board approval of the advertisements is on July 19th. We're required by state statute to list, print in the newspaper what our budget is going to be, what our required local effort, the increases in the millage rates are going to be. So we have the board approve that prior to us printing in the newspaper, so that takes place on July 19th. Then our tentative budget adoption is on August 2nd, and our final budget adoption is on September 6th. So with that, you have been asking questions during the presentation, but are there any questions that the committee still has?
I haven't looked carefully at the report, but I wonder if it should include some of those considerations for the future. And I am particularly sensitive to the capital things that were just mentioned, that there's a concern in those last 5 years. And because this is the piece that I think the public sees, or that they can take information from. So I just think that there should be more of I love the first paragraph. I think that's really nicely done. But, I just wonder if we should have some more cautionary tales.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Anita?
I was just going to say, if you look down to paragraph 4, although certainly we could add to it, I think it kind of encapsulates what you said in terms of the monitoring and the pieces that are really going to be critical for us to keep our eye on.
we don't mention anything about the sunsetting of the sales tax
That's a big one.
and the actual dollar amount that's going to be, the amount of, the actual dollar amount of what's going to be diverted to charter schools from capital. So maybe adding in
Eh,
some of those specifics.
And the other, nothing has been mentioned here, but the inflationary impacts on the budget that may have affected what could be done now.
Correct, and that was part of the capital plan as well, is that a lot of the reserves in the out years were to compensate for increased costs, because what it costs now is not what it's gonna cost, 5 years from now. And even when we were building the budget, the costs are increasing much more significantly than what we were even projecting internally.
And
For,
so what you've done now
Right.
has cost more into the.
Well, even when we look at FY '24, the first year, there are projects in there that we haven't awarded the construction costs on yet because the projects haven't started. Every discussion I have with construction is, that number is going to get higher, right? So that is additional borrowing for those big projects, which does hit the bottom line. So we're seeing that current year as well as in the future. The costs inflation is high, construction inflation is significant magnitudes above that. It's incredible, the price changes we see there.
for example, the high school that we just built, the cost of that high school was,
About 105 million total budget. And
And then-
Sarasota
right.
is building one right now. Their budget is 175 million.
I couldn't believe it when Ms. Evans told me that it's that significant. And they're not gonna go back down, it's just the costs are gonna kind of settle off.
And that, I don't, that doesn't need to be in the report, but I think that those are figures that should be public. That everybody should be aware, I mean, we're all aware of the daily inflationary impacts. But you always think that public money, the prices don't go up somehow. And you said you were going to get this done, and you didn't get it done. You haven't replaced our roof. That's kind of a critical thing. So those are the kinds of things that I think we should figure out ways to make public, whether it's saying it while you're giving the report or just, I don't know, thinking about getting it out there
Okay.
when you talk to the press.
Any other input?
Am I understanding correctly, Heather, that if we go through this today and make any other, beyond what's been suggested already, additions or changes to this, that we wouldn't necessitate a meeting on June 2nd if we're able to do that and make the revisions? Or are we needed to have that meeting in order?
That's up to the committee. What we've
Okay.
done in the past is if the committee felt comfortable with me working with whoever is going to do the presentation, I would make changes to the draft report, send it out to all the committee members. Committee members cannot speak to each other,
Right.
but they can respond back to me. And then I can
And then you
incorporate,
would share.
I would incorporate, any other feedback and changes within the report. And so it's up to the committee's direction. I have the second set is reserved, and I also have the 8th reserved as well. This room reserved if it was needed.
So I'm happy as long as we can, again, haven't read it carefully, but I might want to send something else in.
I agree.
Yep, so
And you'll get it back to us before the
beforehand.
7th.
Yes, yes, I definitely will get it back before the 7th.
And you said a volunteer. I'd like to suggest the chair make the report if she's willing.
All right.
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. If nobody else is volunteering, I see there aren't crowds coming forward.
And
so
I
I'd be
did tell
happy
Ms.
to do
Menino
that.
too, that the presentation, that the report would be attached, but the presentation doesn't have to be the full report. It can
Yeah.
be, it can be, you know, a shorter summary. So she didn't feel like she had to read through the whole thing. And you get to be with us. You're not up there by yourself. All right. All right, so if there are, yeah.
I, don't you have an employee who's leaving, who's been supporting us beautifully? And can we say something wonderful about how wonderfully she's supported us as board members, not board, as committee members, but maybe how wonderfully she's supported you and, or in this committee?
Now I'm, oh, Debbie Hardy. Because I'm like, who would, I don't. Well, Debbie, but the reason why I don't feel that Debbie's going is because she's still going, I told her she still has to make us treats for the meetings, so she still has to come. So, yes,
But
Debbie Hardy was very.
She's been wonderful to us.
She has been amazing. These treats are homemade, and I mean, she does an amazing job. Ms. Hardy was retired for 5 years, and I asked her to come back and help me, and she has been absolutely amazing. And like I told her, I'm like, we don't have to be upset about it because now you can just come back and just bring us stuff. And so I already have a list. Even the superintendent has his favorites that he likes. So his favorites are the brownies with the peanut butter. So if you haven't tried those, make sure to have one. But thank you very much, Debbie.
Yes,
And like I
echo
said,
that.
she's not going away. And then I also should mention, Blair Littlejohn has been our committee attorney, and so he's retiring as well. He's really retiring, and he's not here. You can see he kind of started already. His last day, I think, is June 6th, and he's been amazing. Whenever there are any questions that come up as to what are we allowed to do, how are we supposed to operate, because this is all sunshine, and we do have to be very careful that we follow the state rules, and so he always keeps us on track, and he really has, he's going to be greatly missed. I work closely with him. Ms. Evans works closely with him. He's the main attorney that she works with, and now there isn't just one that can replace him. I think Ms.
I've
Evans-
got 3 different attorneys I'm working with now in place of Blair, so yeah, I'm going to miss him. And the new attorneys that are working with us are really good too. I've worked with Blair since 2001, and he does all the compliance for debt, for our debt issues, and banking contracts, underwriter contracts. You know, he was the sole attorney for everything I did. So I'm getting to know 3 other attorneys very well. But we do really wish Blair all the best in his retirement. We have a gathering this evening.
His retirement party is tonight, so
Losing a lot of institutional knowledge. with
that's
these
exactly
folks.
what's walking out the door. Yeah, so I wanted to also mention Blair too, because that's who I thought you were talking about. Because like I said, she's not allowed to go away. She left, and I still made her come back. But Blair really is leaving, and he's not coming back, and he's very excited. So
I would like to just point of reference, go on record to say thank you to all of you, Mr. Sanchez, Ms. Evans, Ms. Frederick, for your efforts, because these are definitely uncertain, scary times financially across the nation, but certainly educationally. And you're right, we had a lot of uncertainties, and you said it, you know, kind of tongue-in-cheek, that while we were able to do, that's a huge feat for what you all are working with. And so thank you for that, and thank you for commending you for getting us the information so that we're able to digest and review it to be here. So kudos to all of you.
And so that's why there weren't really many changes. It was really pretty much just status quo because of the uncertainty that's out there, and just really trying to address the state mandated increases in the FRS, as well as the health premiums. That's a regulatory requirement as well, that our premiums cover our claims. So yeah, the only changes to the budget are things that we had to do this year.
You make us feel safer in this county. That's
Well,
great.
no, and thank the committee, because you are volunteers, so thank you for committing the time. I know that it's not easy. And I appreciate you taking the time to participate. Because that's what makes our district different. Whenever I go and present nationally, I say that we have external advisory committees, and that way it gives the public the confidence to know that we're not doing this behind closed doors. It is a transparent process. We are open about what we do. Our motto is, promises made, promises kept. And we do that by the use of the committees, by volunteers willing to give up their time to provide some confidence to the community. So thank you.
So I think I understand that we're to be sending suggested revisions, edits, questions to you, then you'll send those back out to
Yes,
us.
yep.
Okay, and I'll offer myself, if I can
And I'll-
facilitate in helping with this process at all, a meeting with you to incorporate those changes or revisions, I'm happy to do that.
Okay, thank you. So, thank you, everybody.
Meeting adjourned.
Meeting is adjourned.